YouTube channel. I'm very excited to have you back for my third Bigfoot related interview, this time with Brett Eichenberger, director of A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. I've seen Bigfoot documentaries since I was a little kid. I don't know, I can't count how many I've watched, and I love this one. I'm really excited to talk to Brett. The film talks to a wide range of people, everybody from eyewitnesses to researchers to academic professionals, data analysts, and well-known figures like Ron Moorhead, Peter Byrne, Dr. Jeff Meldrum. So really looking forward to talking to Brett in a few minutes. Before that, I just wanted to rewind to my first video in the series and call out the first one with Michael Freeman, son of famed Bigfoot researcher Paul Freeman. Michael's got a book coming out about his father's research, and the link to pre-order that book is in the video description, so check that out for sure. My second interview was with Dr. Simeon Hein, author of Dark Matter Monsters, which is an incredible book. Simeon looks at the Bigfoot phenomenon through the lens of science and puts forward a lot of theories that take the phenomenon above and beyond the flesh and blood theory that we've been living with for a long time, and may help explain some of the paranormal aspects of Bigfoot. So definitely check that book out. I loved it. darkmattermonsters.com. And then you can support my work, this channel, my music, all the stuff that I do. You can subscribe here. You'll get notified about future interviews, and I've got some really cool ones lined up, even after this one with Brett. So stay tuned for that. You can get a Bigfoot t-shirt illustrated by me at creatureportal.com. That's my online store. It will lead to my store on Bonfire. It's still me. Don't worry, it's not a spam site or anything like that. The t-shirts are available in multiple colors and styles for men and women. And here you see it modeled by Mike Freeman himself. That illustration is Patty. It's based on Patty at the Patterson-Gimlin film site. So give that a purchase. You can add a donation on top of that. And then last but not least, you can also buy my music at richardturgeon.com. And when you buy music on Bandcamp in particular, you can add a donation, and that gives artists the most revenue of anything. You know, iTunes, Spotify, all that stuff is nice, but Bandcamp, most of the money goes back to the artist. So consider a purchase there. Help me keep these videos and my music going. I would greatly appreciate it. And with all that said, I'm going to turn it over to my interview with Brett. So thanks for watching. So I'm here with director Brett Eichenberger, director of Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, an amazing documentary. As I said in the intro, I'm super excited to talk to Brett here. Brett, before we get into my many questions, I just wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into the Bigfoot topic in the first place.
So my background is I've more or less been a filmmaker since I was a kid. I knew I wanted to direct movies when I was in the second grade after I saw E.T. I felt the emotion and, the ranges of emotion in that film. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I asked my father as we left the movie, I said, who did that? Who was behind it? You know what I mean? I was just very interested in again, the emotional component and the technical component. And I was lucky enough that my father was in TV. He did like infomercials. He did like those cheesy late night, things that all us insomniacs used to watch when they were out there. And he had cameras, and so he let me use the cameras. He trusted a little kid with, expensive, few $1,000 camera, and I'd go out and I'd make little movies with my friends. And it's kind of the old cliched filmmaker story. And, throughout this period of time with my fascination with Spielberg and the paranormal and whatnot, is when I really became interested in Bigfoot. And, growing up here in Oregon, we're just literally an hour away from the mountains and from vast wilderness areas. And, I've heard about the legend of Bigfoot since I can remember. And, my father would tease me on camping trips that Bigfoot was going to come get me in the middle of the night. As a kid, that was petrifying. But at the same time, it was still enough of a mystery to keep me more intrigued than scared. if that makes any sense. So,
Mhm.
so long story short, so I got into the filmmaking business and started doing all kinds of different things to really just make it into a career. Sometimes those things are amazing. Sometimes they're, corporate videos and the like. And I'm not complaining because I love what I do, but I would much rather be doing this all the time, doing either feature films or documentaries. Um, and so basically what happened was my wife Jill and I, who's a producer and writer on the film, we'd been talking about doing a Bigfoot documentary for the longest time. And as fate would have it, we ended up meeting these guys who were interested in potentially investing in one of our features about 10 years ago. And they just out of the blue, they said, "You guys interested in Bigfoot?" And we said, "Well, yeah, actually we are." And they said, "Well, we happen to know these guys that kind of get together, in this undisclosed private area. It's kind of a private event,
Mm.
and all the who's who in the Bigfoot world are there. Would you guys like to come?" And I mean, we like flipped out. Like, yeah, are you kidding me? So we ended up going, and it's 10 years ago, and we met all of the stars in the Bigfoot world, people that we'd known just as interested folks, and we weren't researchers per se, but we watched the shows and everything else. And so we met Peter Byrne and Ron Moorhead and Todd Neist. Who I know all of those names are familiar to Bigfoot enthusiasts, and we kept going back as much as we could to this event. And when the pandemic hit, we kind of thought, hey, we don't have any work. What's a better way to social distance than going out in the woods and making a documentary on Bigfoot? So, long story short, that's what we ended up doing. And we figured it would take us like 6 months, which in the filmmaking world is a short amount of time. Um, but we knew what we needed to get after watching, everything that was out there. And while we enjoyed all of those documentaries, we felt that there was something missing big
Mm.
time. And what I felt was missing was heart, was the human side. Um, and we're seeing people that are seeing we're seeing people that are witnessing something that they can't explain, but they know what they saw. And there's an emotional trauma there that's important, and it needs to be addressed. It needs to be talked about, regardless of whether it was positive or negative. It's still a lifelong memory that these people will never ever forget, and it effectively changes their worldview,
Mm.
and a lot of times changes their spiritual view as well. So, so that's the documentary that we set out to make, is a documentary that really kind of treats eyewitnesses with respect, um, and finds good quality eyewitnesses that it wasn't just something like, well, I think I saw a blob in the woods or whatever. It's like they know what they saw. I really wanted two witnesses, so they could corroborate each other. Um, Yeah, so that's kind of like in a nutshell how everything kind of came to be.
Yeah, amazing. And I think that's why, as somebody that's seen so many of these documentaries, why it connected with me. And I'm not going to go on about this, but I had my own audio experience with a friend who's familiar with the Bigfoot topic. It went on for 15 minutes, something like that. But the heart in your movie, you treating the witnesses with respect, and the emotional component, sometimes traumatic, sometimes pushed down subconsciously, sometimes they're afraid, sometimes it's kind of celebrated in an almost like a spiritual way. And that's what I
Yeah.
found most fascinating about this documentary, was that you're really talking to these people who have been in the closet, so to speak, for a long time, and maybe they're coming out for the first time in your documentary. But that's, to me, what made it so powerful, in addition to being so informative and full spectrum in all these other ways. So we'll get a bit more into that, but it's great to learn just kind of how you came to get into the topic in the form of this film. I love the quote at the beginning of the movie: "The time will come when diligent research over long periods will bring to light things which now lie hidden." Lucius Seneca. And I wanted to know, did you see that as part of the film's mission in some way?
Yes, yes, because that's kind of my way of saying we cannot stop no matter what. Scrutiny, haters, whatever you want to call it. We have to keep doing the diligent research. And eventually this is going to come to light, because it's not, for me, for us, for everybody involved in this film, it's not a matter whether Bigfoot exists or not. We know Bigfoot exists. We know Bigfoot exists because of the quality of the eyewitnesses. And I believe that, with the thousands of sightings out there that are A quality sightings, I mean, you could go and you could win a court case. You could convince a jury that Bigfoot is real. And I understand and completely agree with the scientific community in that they need a body in order to, put it in science books and to unequivocally call it a real life thing. But for me and for us involved in this film, that's the only thing that's missing. Like literally, after what we've seen and heard, it's the only thing that's missing is a body.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting to me is there's other animals out there in the animal kingdom, the giant squid, for instance, that had been seen and observed many times, and they didn't have one. They didn't have a body, but science was kind of like, oh yeah, the giant squid. We know it's out there. We've seen it. But in the case of Bigfoot, we know that scientists have seen Bigfoot. We know that very prominent scientists have seen Bigfoot, but they won't talk about it. And we have spoken to those individuals, and they would not go on camera. And many of them were afraid of the ridicule. They were afraid of losing funding. There's one of the superintendents of a very prominent national park in the Pacific Northwest had a Class A sighting 3 feet away.
Wow.
And it's not in the media. Nobody's heard about it. And rightfully so. He doesn't want, a mass amount of people descending on the national park, tromping through the woods and the forest looking for Bigfoot, because we all know that there's some trophy hunters out there.
Yeah, trying to kill them. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's not to get too far ahead, but that's a big reason as to why we believe that it's not public knowledge, has been made public knowledge. There is a consortium of people, of individuals in high places that are trying to keep this secret, in our opinion, for the protection of Bigfoot, and for the protection of other things such as the recreation industry, small towns. We cover some of this stuff in the documentary.
Yeah, fascinating. The film features such a wide range of people, from eyewitnesses to researchers to academic professionals, data analysts. Ron Moorhead, I'm reading Ron's book right now. I've seen him in a number of documentaries and interviews. Peter Byrne, Dr. Jeff Meldrum. I'm just wondering how you selected this group and ultimately wove their stories together. I know you had a couple of writers, and I'm wondering if it came together. First of all, I guess the selection process, but then did it come together in the writing and editing process? And there must have been a lot of discoveries you started to talk to all these people too.
Yeah. So we really wanted to have a diverse group of individuals, and some folks might, realize that there's some people that are missing from, maybe TV and whatnot, the Bobos, the Cliff Barackmans, the Russ Accords. And we kind of wanted to go back in time a little bit. Henry Franzoni, for instance, is somebody that's not really well known in the Bigfoot community, really anymore, I should say. Henry was a very prominent figure in the Bigfoot community years ago, and he worked alongside with Peter Byrne. And so we wanted to hear what Henry had to say. And he had kind of left the community, and so we coaxed him to come back and talk to us. But Henry had a lot of information from, his work with the native people here in the Pacific Northwest. And that was an important thing for us too. We interviewed Marcia, and Marcia is someone you might not see in the typical Bigfoot documentary, but Marcia gets into the fact that there have been many different types of people that have walked this earth. And some of which in the native community could have a direct connection to Bigfoot, to Sasquatch. There's a tribe on Vancouver Island that have red hair, and they claim that they have some DNA that could be attributed to Sasquatch. So, we wanted to pull individuals in like that to really kind of give a what's the word I'm looking for? An overall view, 100-foot view of Bigfoot and the phenomenon and its origins.
Yeah, a full spectrum view. And that's the other
Yeah.
thing I loved about the documentary was that in addition to the people, the eyewitnesses that you interviewed, you really connected dots between a lot of prominent researchers and even many that I had not heard of in this very fascinating, fully dimensional way. And I love that. Speaking of Henry, I did have a question about Henry Franzoni.
Mm-hmm.
I had never heard of him before your film, and I thought what he had to say was really fascinating. He talks about how Bigfoot stories are owned by these indigenous tribes. They have secret societies. They've even shared some stories and photos with him. He says they know what they are, what they want, where they live, that sort of thing. And it made me think of some of the work of David Paulides, if you've heard of David's work, but he studied Native Americans in his book, The Hoopa Project, Tribal Bigfoot, both books on my bookshelf along with some of David's others. And I've seen too in my own research that sightings often correspond with Native American reservations and territory, whether that's federally owned or still, owned by the Native Americans. I've heard Native Americans describe Bigfoot as guardian of forest, he who walks between worlds. They talk about the same tribe. So I'm wondering if Native Americans know what Bigfoot really is, as Henry kind of seems to be saying or alluding to, and what is that relationship to man? Is it the same or different in the modern era? So I don't know if you have any sort of secret knowledge and you can only, speak to what you're comfortable with, but there has to be something there and some knowledge there that we aren't privy to, and maybe for good reason. But I'm just wondering if you came across some of that in your talks with Henry and some other folks.
We did, yes, we did. And we didn't get too much more information than what we put in the documentary. I mean, one of the things I can say is, and this goes from some of the other Native folks that we've talked to, is that there's a very intimate connection between the Native people and Bigfoot. And obviously Sasquatch is derived from the name escapes me, but it's a tribe from southern British Columbia that coined the term Sasquatch. That's where that came from. But a lot of Native peoples call them Sabe. There's some in the Midwest that call them Satonga. But there's hardly a tribe in North America that doesn't have a Bigfoot connection.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that Henry told me that was really surprising, and as a filmmaker kind of made me salivate a little bit, was that so many of these tribes have crystal clear video of them.
Wow.
And photographs. And one instance of that was Henry was describing how he watched a video. It was crystal clear. It could have been any animal, but it was a Sasquatch swimming across the Columbia River. Clear as day.
Fascinating.
And again, it's that same kind of a thing. I mean, to these tribes, to these longhouses, that's theirs. It belongs to them. That is a trophy. That is you could even think of it as like a relic, that has significant spiritual significance.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of like, oh man, wouldn't that be amazing to get a
Oh,
hold
wow.
of?
Yeah. There must be some sort of time honored, honor code in the tribes and whatnot that don't allow for the release of these sorts of things. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that's because they want to maintain that relationship and want it unspoiled. And I'm just wondering what the rules are, behind their keeping it secret, which is probably to the benefit of Bigfoot at the end of the day. And that maybe that's what they care about most, is that they want to keep it sacred and left alone. I don't mean to make any assumptions. I'm just wondering if you kind of drew a similar conclusion.
Yes, absolutely. Because Bigfoot is very spiritual
Mm-hmm.
and very important. So, just for instance, we got word of someone, and I'm going to be very vague about this, but we got word of someone who'd captured crystal clear video of 7 a family of 7 standing on a riverbank. This is the summer. And this individual was, in his late teens. And he just kind of stood there like a tourist at Yellowstone Park and got 7 crystal clear. And he had it on his phone and debated about putting it out there, and it weighed too heavily on him, and he deleted it.
Wow.
Completely deleted it. Didn't save it anywhere, didn't back it up, showed a few people and deleted it. And he was more or less advised to, but there was almost a feeling of guilt with him. And I think he might have been guilted by some of the elders too. I don't want to assume anything, but that was kind of the vibe that I was getting.
Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah.
Who knows what's out there? I've always suspected though that there's much more out there than we know about for various reasons. Getting into that, I'll get into that a bit later in your One Eyewitness, Kyle. I did want to cover off on the Freeman footage, which I was delighted to see is featured in your film.
Mm-hmm.
Having just spoken to Paul's son, Michael, a few weeks ago, who is incredibly knowledgeable about his father's research and the topic, in general. And he doesn't even call himself a researcher. He's more of a custodian of his father's research, and has this book coming out. The whole reason I wanted to talk to him was because I really wanted to know the story, not just behind the footage, but behind the man who took it. And again, getting back to how your film is so much about the eyewitnesses and their lives and their feelings, and what happened, what's behind the camera for that 10 seconds of footage. Sometimes it's not an accident, sometimes it is. With Paul, it clearly was not. I've been familiar with that footage since the internet. I think it went up on YouTube 10 years ago or something. I always wanted to know more about him. And talking to Michael, he put up with a lot of ridicule, and their family had to move. And, his father was accused of faking this and that. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you feel like since, over the years with more and more people pushing it, as we talked about in the beginning of this interview, pushing the research, not stopping, do you think more people are willing to open up about this topic today? And why?
That's part of our mission, is to get people to open up about it. And the ridicule out there is hard. It's tough. But we're starting to find, just through the Oregon, Washington area, and talking to folks about our documentary, folks that are outside the Bigfoot community, we start hearing these kind of whispers, these people saying, well, so-and-so had one, or, my dad had one, my grandfather had one. The guy that was repairing our furnace this past winter looks around and goes, what's with all the Bigfoot stuff? And we're like, well, so on and so forth documentary. And he says, my grandfather was the chief of police of a city right here near Portland. And he'd go out and he'd sit in a chair with his gun and just wait for an elk to come by. That's how he went hunting, right? He'd go up in the Oregon Coast Range. He'd sit there, watch for an elk, and when one came by, he'd take it out, right? It's kind of like hunting and fishing in one. And he was up there one time, and it wasn't an elk; it was a sasquatch.
Wow.
Came out of the bushes. They made eye contact. They were, 40, 50 feet away from each other, extremely close. He was so terrified, he got up, jumped in his truck, and took off. He never even went back and got his chair and gun. His favorite gun. He left it sitting there. And this guy says to his grandson, he says, this is the only time I'm ever going to tell you this story. Don't ever ask me about it again. And nobody knew about it. And he didn't want anybody to know about it. Yeah. And this is so common, and Simeon, I don't know if Simeon talked about this. I watched a portion of your interview, but I didn't get a chance to finish the whole thing. But Simeon, as a sociologist, talks about it being a hidden event. Where there's this all of these people that have seen these things but are too afraid to talk about it. So we need to start changing that, and getting rid of that taboo. And we really felt like this was the perfect time to do this documentary because of what's happening in the UFO community and the federal government coming out basically saying, yep, UFOs are real. We don't know what they are. It could be foreign countries. And we all know better than that.
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody's going to have anti-gravity that can go from sea level to 85,000 feet in 3 seconds, it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
us.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be the Americans. So, and still, I mean, that doesn't follow the laws of physics. And so what we're doing and what we're saying is we're saying, yeah, there's strange stuff in the skies, but there's also strange stuff in the forest.
Mm-hmm.
Only 30% of all wilderness has been touched by man. So what else? Farouk Muhammad said it beautifully in the film. What else is there out there?
Yeah.
And as a tease, that's what segues us into our next film, into our sequel.
Mm-hmm. Which I cannot wait to see, and we'll talk about that. What's in
Yeah.
store there? But yeah, I think Simeon's views. We talked about that. We unpacked his background as a sociologist, and I thought that was very interesting in how he talked about the hidden events and the stigma and the taboo about just talking about these things. And hopefully, conversations like this and the one that I had with him will loosen things up. I mean, I know that my own interest in Bigfoot dormant for a few years, then it's like full bore, then dormant again. And what I'm kind of unpacked it for me all over again was this experience I had, not just that, but a willingness to anonymously report that. And then somebody got in touch with me that led to a series of events. So I was like, I don't care anymore. I didn't even attach my name to the report. I wanted it to be anonymous, but then it opened things up. So I'm hoping that conversations like this, open up I guess like prompt other eyewitnesses to come forward who might not, usually it's people who are older, they have something they want to unburden. And I'm hoping the other 95% of people that have experiences like this, come forward as well. I wanted to segue into some of the people in the film. Daryl Wilson, his story really struck me. It was such a beautifully told and well filmed eyewitness account, but it was an example of the profound kind of effect the sighting can have on someone's life. And it seemed different from the two witnesses at the lake, those younger guys who seemed a little more unnerved by their reality at the time just being shattered and living with that. Whereas Daryl, being a cancer patient and having this, foreboding prognosis, saw it as almost this spiritual event, a gift, if you will. And I'm just wondering if, in talking to all the eyewitnesses that you did, if there was this sort of majority feeling like it could go from, they go through a range of feelings, right? You can accept it. At first you don't accept it, and then you kind of do accept it, like some of the people you spoke to. They can be terrified. They can try to reject it. They can try to push it down. Maybe they share it with their grandson. Maybe they go on camera and in documentary like yours and talk about it. I'm just wondering if you found kind of what was the biggest pattern that you saw? Like most people were just terrified, or most people were incredibly happy that this happened to them. So I'm just wondering where you netted out with that, I guess.
I almost want to just say squarely in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that the takeaway is that it's a blessing and a curse.
Mm-hmm.
And we get into that more in the sequel, because the sequel gets in, the paranormal side of things. So you're talking like Bigfoot times 10.
Right.
Some of the things that folks have seen are going to be hard for some people to digest.
Right.
And again, these are multiple witnesses and they're very credible.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say this much. I don't think anything that's coming up in the sequel is any more, I don't know if controversial is the right word, any crazier than alien abductions.
Right.
Which I believe are happening. We just don't know if that's a government thing or if it's a combination or whatnot. Not to get off topic, but yeah, there was definitely some people who were terrified. There was definitely some people that wanted to get right back into the forest as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
There were definitely, like Chad and Austin. It was great that those two guys were so close and that they were together at the time, because they needed to keep qualifying that sighting and that experience with each other, and they were there for support. I mean, it would have been a pity if Austin was up at the camp and Chad was down there fishing by himself and he saw it.
Mm-hmm.
then there would have been this debate, and it could have very easily ended their friendship.
Right.
So that was when I first heard that story. I actually found that story on Facebook. And so I said, "Hey, Chad, can I get on the phone with you and talk to you about your experience?" And we got a chance to talk to them, and he ran the whole emotional gamut, from being excited to being freaked out to
Mm.
thinking like a father, thinking, can I bring my children out into the woods anymore? You go through this whole cycle of emotions and questions. It's not unlike seeing a traumatic event happen, whether you're driving on the freeway and you see an accident, or
In
you're
war.
injured yourself. You're different. You approach life differently. You're
Hmm.
always going to put your seatbelt on from that day forward, so on and so forth. You're always going to be that much more cautious. And Chad and Austin are never, ever, ever going to go back into the wilderness again and not think about that day.
Right. Right.
Which to me says it's real, right? Because, so many of us have seen bear, cougars, predators, whatnot, and it's exciting. And
Hmm.
you're kind of on a little bit of a high, especially the first time you see something rare in the wild. For a couple of days, you're like, oh wow, I can't believe that I got to actually see a grizzly bear up close or whatever. But this is something that kind of haunts you to a
Yeah.
certain extent. But they also felt extremely lucky that they were able to have had that experience. Todd Neese has talked about that a little bit off camera, about how it's both a blessing and a curse.
Hmm.
And then Doug Meacham, the hypnotherapist, talks about how one individual realized through the hypnotherapy that they will never ever see something like this ever again.
Right.
And that's where the beauty component comes from, because they're a lot of the stories we heard, and I really wish that we could have gotten into this more, and we are going to get into it a little bit more in the sequel, is that these are not apes. These are, they could have some sort of ape DNA in them, just like we do, but these are a being. They are extremely intellectual, and they have family units like humans do, and they have a sense of humor. They've so many people that have had multiple experiences would tell us something funny. They would that have these great stories about how human like they were.
Yeah.
So that's the other side of things.
Yeah, I've heard over and over again about and I'm talking to, my next interview is with somebody who's been interacting with some individuals for a long time, and everything you're saying just kind of lines up with, what we've heard from hundreds of other eyewitnesses about their personalities, their individuals, their people. They're more people, much more people and individuals than they are some sort of lost primitive ape. They have
Yeah.
language. They know how to outfox us. They, like you said, they give gifts, all these things. So one of the newcomers in the film I had not seen or heard of, Sonia Zohar, and she had some
Hmm.
interesting perspectives on Bigfoot. She says things like it's in their best interest to stay hidden. We can't harm them, but we can harm their environment. They only show themselves to those they want to show themselves to. And I actually broached that topic with both Michael and Simeon, this idea of their intuition and abilities to maybe I guess intuit people's intentions.
Hmm.
And I'm not making any claims to that or asserting that, but that seems to be another thread in bleeding into that paranormal aspect and their abilities, their unique abilities. And so I'm wondering how she arrived at some of her conclusions, and if you can tell us a little bit more about her background, how she kind of came to some of these beliefs. Which again,
Yes.
somebody like me, I've read through eyewitness accounts and in talking to people, but like in a researcher like her, I'm just wondering how she came to some of these conclusions.
Sonia really jumped into Bigfoot research head first. She came into it through, I don't think this is in the film, but she talks about, or she talked about, um, she was like, I'm trying to remember the story now. She was like at a friend's house or something like that, and somebody was watching the show, and she was in the other room, and she heard something on a big, I don't think it was Expedition Bigfoot, but it was something talking about some of the components of Bigfoot, and that perked her interest. And so she thought, well, I'd never really thought about this before, but this was super interesting. And then she went and did some research on it, and then one thing led to another. She kind of went down the rabbit hole. I totally just did no justice to her story, but in a nutshell, that was kind of what happened. She didn't have like an experience in the woods prior to that. It just really wasn't on her radar until something that she'd heard click. It just clicked with her. And so she jumped down the rabbit hole, and then she started making contacts to Bigfoot world very quickly. She met up with Todd Standing. This is a number of years ago. She met up with Mike Patterson in Ontario, Canada, who's had a number of fascinating experiences and has really gotten to know Sasquatch.
I'm talking to Mike next. That's who I was referring to.
Are you talking to next? Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely ask him about Sonia.
Okay.
And through those experiences out in the wilderness, Todd Standing, for instance, they are way, way out there. He goes way out there, somewhere in Alberta or something. And through those experiences, she had some pretty profound things happen. And I think she's only ever really had a glimpse of one, but it was the other kind of paranormal stuff that have kind of happened. And that builds and builds, and then we touch on some more of that through the gifting process in the sequel with Sonia, and she's got some incredible stories.
Awesome! I can't wait to see more of what comes out of that. I didn't know that she had gone so deep into it and had been talking to people like Mike and Todd Standing. So yeah, that's great. So we'll see more of her, I'm sure, in the future, and can't wait to hear more from her. So tell us a little bit more. Actually, I'm skipping ahead here to jump back. And I'm looking at some notes here. I wanted to talk about Kyle, the anonymous Army intelligence guy. I thought his story was convincing. I've heard stories like his before. He said that 4 were taken out and autopsied in a military base. He also spoke to the government's main concern being financial and the impact that this might have on small towns, the secret of Bigfoot being revealed or whatever. I've heard similar stories of the military hunting down and battling, so-called rogue or aggressive Bigfoot. I've also heard stories, urban legends, I don't know, of the government working with Bigfoot to help them after the Mount St. Helens eruption. I have read countless eyewitness accounts where black helicopters are following Bigfoot and people watching the Bigfoot or vice versa. And you spoke about Expedition Bigfoot, and that actually happened on the show at one point, or I think a few different points where they were very close on the trail or seemed to be. And they were noticing these helicopters in the middle of nowhere, and I'm sure that they're very remote. So I was just wondering, like, what you took away from Kyle's story. I know he was off camera, and it's probably highly classified. I'm sure you can't talk about it much more than what we saw in the film. But I'm wondering if there's anything else you can tell us about that, because I thought it was so compelling and interesting. And I think there's a part of me too that I don't know how I feel about our ability to actually go out and hunt a Sasquatch, because I've heard from hunters that it's virtually impossible. It's impossible to get a picture, let alone track them, let alone kill them. And so that's why I can't say I was on the fence about believing his story. I'm just wondering, like, where you stood with that, knowing what we know and maybe knowing what he knows. I don't know.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I will say, I speak on behalf of everyone that's involved in this movie, that we are 100% against the hunting and the killing of Bigfoot.
Same.
Period. It's in our eyes, it's murder.
Yeah.
It's unnecessary, and that's a reflection. There is not a single person in our documentary who doesn't believe that. And if there is, I'm not gonna make any assumptions. So Kyle was very interesting. We spoke to him pretty early in the documentary, in the making of the film, and it took us quite some time to finally get him to agree to go on camera and talk to us. He came to us via a friend of a friend, and his experience was very unique. Part of the reason that he ended up in the position that he ended up in the Army is because he had an experience when he was 13 years old, a
Wow.
sighting. And one of the worst things about making a film sometimes is your running length. You've got to keep things short. And so we just didn't really have the screen time to get into his story, which is unfortunate. But the short story of it is he was up near Mount Adams as a 13-year-old, and he was he was out there camping with his family, and folks were separated, and he went over to a little stream that, I don't know that he was picking berries or he was doing something that had to do with that stream, and he heard a kind of a grunt and a snarl, and he looked up, and there is a female, a mother, and a juvenile, 20, 25 feet away from him, and she's showing her teeth and projecting this message on him: you are not welcome here, you need to leave now.
Wow.
And it literally scared the crap out of him, and that was a very traumatic thing for him for years and years.
I'm sure.
Yeah. And so I don't know if that came through, if a superior of his or whatnot found out about that in the Army or whatever, but they kind of put him,
Recruited him.
yeah, recruited him. There's some other things that he told us I cannot share. But he didn't end up in that position by accident. I'll just tell you that much. And he certainly cares about them. He cares about the Sasquatch. He knows, just like the rest of us know through our research, that these are beings. He really felt like this mother was doing whatever she could to protect her child. And so when he found out about this unit that goes out and kind of, takes out these aggressive animals or whatever that is they call them, code name, he didn't get into that, but when he found out about that, he was pretty upset about it. And so, I said, hey, listen, why don't you go on camera and talk about it a little bit? Well, we will keep you 100% safe, and Kyle's obviously not his real name, or maybe not obviously, but it's not his real name. You're never going to find him if you look for Kyle, but we wanted to get the information out, and we felt like, and I still feel this way, that information is kind of hard to digest, and we didn't really want to go down the conspiracy theory hole. But part of the reason that we ended up putting that in there was because we've heard it from so many other people.
Yeah. I'm glad that you did. Yeah.
I think it's important. I think it's important for people to know, and it also backs up the fact that, like Rich Germeau says, leading into Kyle's interview, it's if there's an apex predator out there that's humanoid, then the government's going to know about it. And I used to be a government contractor. I used to work for the DoD. I used to live in Washington D.C. and I would frequent the Pentagon, so on and so forth. I had a secret clearance, but I was very low level. There's nothing that I know that the general public doesn't really know. There's some things I've seen that hasn't been released and stuff, but I don't hold any big secrets. But I did get a great idea as to how the government works and how they function, and the red tape and what the defense interests are, in protecting Americans. And I think the U.S. government, from a defense perspective, is very interested in keeping the public safe. I'm not saying that Bigfoot are threats to us, because we don't have any, aside from David Pilates' theories from Missing 411. We don't have a direct eyewitness account of somebody being mangled or mutilated or murdered by a Bigfoot. There's a lot of talk about that with Alaska Killer Bigfoot and so on and so forth, but there's no direct evidence to support that. And it's like I tell other people, I say, if you're sitting at home watching football and some guy just walks into your house, uninvited, you're going to be pretty upset too.
Mm-hmm.
That's an invasion of your space, and you're going to do whatever you can to get that person to leave. So I really feel like we're dealing with the same kind of a situation with, some of these aggressive behaviors. One of the common things that we all know in the Bigfoot world is people will constantly have rocks thrown at them,
Right.
but nobody has ever been hit by one of the rocks,
Right.
So
I've read that like so many times that it's
yeah,
like you said, you'd be able to prove in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt that this actually happens in reality. Whole chunks, foot-long chunks of bark flying out, and these rocks are sometimes the size of small bowling balls thrown at incredible speed,
yeah,
to warn people off or whatever, ward people off. So yeah, that's where I felt I found Kyle's story so interesting because I've heard similar accounts, not firsthand, but I love that you put an account like that in the film. And I think what piqued my interest most was, wow, the government has the ability to somehow track and hunt them down and even kill them. That's not something I would think that we would have the ability to do based on their abilities. And that kind of corresponds to the other gentleman that you spoke to. I think he was a former police officer or was a police officer at the time. Like, whatever the government knows about them is going to be much more than we, the general population, know about them
yeah,
for whatever reasons, financial or otherwise. So an
yeah.
interesting piece of the rabbit hole or
I'll
corner.
say, I'll add, I'll throw another log in the fire real quick. Not to disappoint anybody, but I have seen with my own eyes a couple of times video from a FLIR camera from a helicopter tracking a Bigfoot that
Mm.
was smuggled out of the military. That's all I can say about it. It will never be released. Well, I shouldn't say never, but we tried to get it, for that segment, but it's only 1 to 2 people deep. This isn't something that's been shared, with other people, so on and so forth. But I've seen it, and it's extraordinary.
Amazing. Well, I'm getting more than I bargained for from this chat. So getting back to sort of Bigfoot's intentions and David's work, I saw Missing 411. I'm sure you saw that documentary as well, and his books and especially that documentary do seem to suggest he's never come out and said it. He's a former police officer and he's trained as such. He only deals with the facts. He won't come out and say, well, I think Bigfoot's taking people from the woods. But that documentary, he's up at the site, the campsite in the Sierras with Ron Moorhead, and seems to suggest that in the context of this documentary that, well, perhaps it's Bigfoot who's taking these people, right? And then you hear stories like Kyle where the government feels like they're compelled to take some out. And I'm just wondering, what's your personal view of what Bigfoot is? Like, this is a very open-ended question. What do they want? What do they think of us? Are they benevolent or hostile? What is their relationship to us other than the obvious, which is they want to be left alone. They want to stay hidden for good reasons to protect themselves. But what is their feeling or relationship to us in your view, having talked to so many of these people?
I'm still formulating that, Rich. It's a tough one. What I do know is that they are a type of people. I believe with everything that I've seen, that they are, interdimensional. They are able to transcend through, time and space somehow. Dr. Simeon Hein has some great theories behind that I'm going to talk about in the sequel.
Mm-hmm.
I, I had a conversation with Ron Moorhead a couple of weeks ago, and that conversation was, are they the original humans? Are they the missing link? Are human beings an alien Bigfoot hybrid? Are we're recreated by a race of aliens, mixing the DNA? I do know that DNA has been tested. It's being ignored from academia for obvious reasons, but the DNA said that we all have a common mother, and the father's unknown. And a lot of the genetic labs, and these are important studies that are being ignored, but the genetic labs are saying, oh yeah, well, it's been tampered with, or it's been, it's got human DNA in it. So, we can't say that it's any unknown animal. And the truth of the matter is the human DNA they're finding in it is the DNA that belongs to the Sasquatch. These samples were taken very, very carefully by people that know how to do this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I do know some of those things. I know that they're capable of cloaking. We have a video that has been out on YouTube that we're going to analyze that much more in the sequel, about the cloaking. I've talked to numerous people about their cloaking abilities. So, there's all kinds of different theories, from them being the Nephilim, which I'm not too sure about, to being just apes, which I can't get on board with that, because there's way too many people that have seen paranormal occurrences at the same time. You can't throw away that data. You can't ignore it, because it's skewing it. That's, if we're going to just throw out the facts, those are the facts. And, we have a story in our film that, in the sequel, that is just going to blow people away. 2 eyewitnesses, happened in Southern Oregon. It's one of the most extraordinary things, and might be the most extraordinary thing I've ever heard in my entire life. I can't wait for people to see the reaction of the story coming in. That's all I can say. But I mean, it's really, really incredible. So I am pretty convinced that if nothing else, they are, some sort of interdimensional being. As far as them being benevolent and hostile, it's just like people. I mean, you've got the Vladimir Putins and the Hitlers, and you've got the Saddam Husseins. You've got horrible people that have existed on this planet throughout history and continue to exist. They want nothing more than blood and power.
Right.
And I don't think it's any different in the Bigfoot world. I think that I don't know that you have individuals out there that are just going out and just killing for the sport of it, but not that humans are really doing that either. There's always a political agenda behind it, but there's definitely some very angry ones out there. And I think those clusters, like, take for instance in the Pacific Northwest, there are clusters of them near Mount Rainier and Mount St. Helens that I've heard that are pretty grumpy. Mount Hood, they're kind of just so. We had an experience, Jill and Mike Ferry and I, the cinematographer of the film, we had an experience in the Midwest with some Sasquatch, where these individuals have just been living in peace with natives for hundreds of years. And we were told a story that was incredible about how, when the native gentlemen were called away to World War II, the women, built these cabins kind of down by the river so they could all be together, not so spread apart. And, one very cold morning, they came out and there was all this firewood that had been broken apart for them and stacked up neatly.
Incredible.
And I mean, we're talking about big, huge trees that had been broken and stuff. It was that same trip that we heard that story that we saw eye shine. That's the only component of a live Bigfoot that we have seen so far, but we saw the eye shine, and what we saw were these eyes observing us and just watching us. So, all of those stories now, and those natives also talk about aggressive behavior, but they also talk about gentle behavior, and they talk about the gifting side of things. They can be very thoughtful in the way that they gift. A lot of the gifting is very touching. It's almost like
personal.
It's very personal. It's almost like getting that Christmas present from your mom as a little kid that, like, you didn't tell her you wanted, but she just knew because you're her child. It's they get in your head, and they kind of play these games, these back and forth games, to kind of just see how far they can push you.
I cannot wait to see your next film. I've only got a couple more questions for you, and definitely want to hear more about that. Before we talk about Bigfoot Revealed 2. I know that's not the official title. Where do you see all this going? Do you think Bigfoot will eventually be accepted by institutions like academia, where Simeon's lived, and some of these other folks you've spoken to, like Jeff Meldrum, Grover Krantz in the past, several others, and even mainstream society? When do you feel like this will loosen up to the point that we're at, maybe even with the UAP or UFO, formerly UFO topic, where the military, I feel like we're at this point, they're admitting, we don't know what this is. They probably do. It's a threat. We're going to just say as much in the public domain, with the Tic Tac video starting and all, kind of like broke open the dam. And I'm just wondering, like, where, even a film like yours just reveals so much information, no pun intended, but where do you see this going with the Bigfoot topic in the next 5 years, 50 years? I don't know, 100. It's been 40 years since the Patterson Gimlin film, right? When do you think the next tipping point or major tipping point might happen?
That's a great question. I think the easy answer is to say when we have a body, but I don't feel that's going to happen. I had a strange premonition about a year ago that full Bigfoot disclosure was coming in 2025. I don't know where it came from. It was in my head. I don't know what that means. I'm just throwing that out there. Personally, I believe that the thing that the UAP has going for it is it's the Department of Defense that's coming out and saying, here are the videos, so on and so forth. We're not going to get that, I don't think, with the Bigfoot, unless we get guys like the National Park Superintendent that has had his sighting, or if we get Native individuals that come out and are willing to release what they know. There is no question in my mind that there are Native individuals out there in North America that could prove the existence of Bigfoot, scientifically speaking. There's no question in my mind. And that may not be in the best interest for their tribe. That may not be in the best interest for Bigfoot. And so there's all these people out there that say, well, if I saw Bigfoot, or if I got a crystal clear photo, I'd post it right away. Or if I got a body, I'd tell people right away. And I disagree with that, because psychologically speaking, you think that, but being in the moment, putting yourself in the moment, no, it's no different than talking about wanting to win the lottery and then realizing when you've won the lottery that you've got 40,000 second cousins that all want a piece of the pie. It then becomes a problem, and studies have shown all these different people out there that have won millions in the lottery, they've lost it within a couple of years, because it becomes a negative thing. And I think that disclosure of Bigfoot can become a very negative thing to the individual that found it, to the location where it was found, so on and so forth, on and on. I think that, what's happening in Oklahoma with this $2 million bounty is not great. It's not a good idea. We don't need more, like we say in the documentary very clearly, we don't need more rednecks, primates out hunting primates. That's something we want. Yeah, we don't need Bigfoot trophy hunters. So it's a really tough question, and I feel like if someone or somebody is going to come out with full disclosure, it's probably going to be the U.S. government or the Forest Service, and if it could be a situation like where they come out and say, well, we've discovered Bigfoot in some really remote area of Alaska, or a really remote area of Alberta or BC or something like that. And they come out and they say, we don't think there's very many of them, but we've seen them out here, leave them alone. You know what I mean? So it's a difficult place for people to get to. That might be one way of doing it. But I do truly feel, like I said, earlier, I had this premonition it's going to come out in 2025. I do truly feel that at some point, very soon, it's going to happen. And that also has to do with the massive changes in technology that we keep making. Moore's Law every few years.
That's fascinating about the premonition. You said 2025, and it reminds me, I literally had it uncorked something, a subconscious memory of mine, where in the mid 90s, I was getting back into this topic. Like I said, sometimes it'll be dormant and back in full force. It's never gone away. Yeah. But I had a photo, the Cliff Crook photo, if you're familiar, Wild Creek photo,
Hmm.
Some call it a fake, some think it's real. I'm not going to get into that, but to me, it looks like a Bigfoot would look, whether it's fake or not. I always like the image, and I had it as a
Yeah.
screensaver at my old job, and
Uh-huh.
my boss saw it at the time, and he was kind of ribbing me about Bigfoot, and I remember saying something like, "I think this mystery we're going to know much more in the next 5 to 10 years." Now that was the mid '90s. Here we are, and look at with the advent of the internet and everybody having a cell phone, and all these eyewitnesses accounts being posted online, documentaries like yours coming out. Look how much farther we've come to really understanding more what's going on, and people like Simeon
Yeah.
pushing it, right? And coming up with these theories to explain some of the crazy stuff that people like you and I have heard and read in hundreds of eyewitness accounts that go above and beyond, like, oh, it's a primitive, undiscovered ape-like man roaming the forest, into the paranormal realm. All that said, that's a perfect segue into your next film, which I can't wait to see, A Flash of Beauty Paranormal 2. I know that our friend Simeon's going to be in it. And I was
Hmm.
wondering if you just tell us when's that coming out and anything else you wanted us to know about it before it's released.
So we've made some big decisions in the last few days. The film is going to be released next Memorial Day. We wish we could get it out faster, you
I
guys.
can't
So I
wait till then.
apologize for
Yeah.
that. We're trying, and we're gonna get a teaser out before the end of the year. Um, and we will be most likely doing a world premiere in Forks, Washington, over Memorial Day weekend, and it will be available shortly thereafter on Amazon and iTunes and other places where we're in right now. Um, but the day job, which is doing the commercials and whatnot, has been extremely busy this summer.
Mhm.
So it's kind of prevented me from working on the film and getting
All
that editing
balance.
done. And yeah. And we are a very small group of people. I mean, it's really the core of us right now is myself, Jill, and Mike. And so we're wearing a lot of hats. So,
Hmm.
if you're a pro editor and you want to get in on this, contact me because I could I
What's
could
this?
use a
I
little bit of help.
will.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, if you're out there, keep me posted. Editor, colorist, visual effects artist. We are gonna have some visual effects in this for recreations. So I want to talk to you guys. But
I might have
it
some
is
names
coming
for you.
along. We do you? Okay, cool. So yeah, we're gonna get it out there as fast as we can. But I can tell you that's even if I get a bunch of help, that still will probably be the soonest that it comes out.
Okay. Well, we'll have to wait. I can't wait. Again, love the first film so much, and I love how you're shifting gears into this realm we've been talking about, which is where I feel like this topic's going. Whether
Yeah.
people like it or not, I've come across Facebook groups that are very hard line. We're flesh and blood group, and I say in the back of my mind that's great. And even other people in the field, friends of mine, that's the stance that they take, and I'm one of those. You believe what you want to believe, and we should all be working toward the same end goal, which is knowing more about what's going on. So there are no feelings there, but I'm more in your camp that there's just too much. You can't discount that we've been hearing about since the silent invasion of Pennsylvania, my home state, and before then, of just things above and beyond, finding footprints or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Brett, it's been an incredible conversation. Like I said, I got a lot more than I expected, and such an amazing film, A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, and this is for the viewers. You have to see this movie. I'm not just saying that because I'm talking to Brett. I actually want to watch it again. I'm asking my wife to watch it with me. It was beautifully
Wow. Wow.
crafted. And if you're interested in this topic at all, even remotely, this is the one film I would recommend that you see. So support Brett's work, and look for more from him. And Brett, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much for talking with me and everybody who's watching.
Thank you, Rich. It's been an honor for me as well. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. All right.